Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Haley Girardi, and I'm the Family Engagement Specialist with Fernbrook Family Center. And tonight is the first of a series of community education topics focused on mental health, and it's brought to you by the City of Casson. And so we're going to go ahead and get started right away tonight. And we will be talking about an important kind of beginner question addressing what is mental health really. So we're going to be understanding mental health, some basics about it, and as part of that, challenging the stigma or the taboo around talking about mental health. So I know I've been tuning into a lot of webinars lately since COVID has started, and I always like to know a little bit about the presenter that I am viewing. And I always advocate for people really understanding where they get their information from, right? Being critical consumers of information, especially on social media. And so let me tell you a little bit about myself so that you can make those calls for yourself about whether you believe what I'm saying, whether you can trust this content, right? So as I said, I'm the Family Engagement Specialist here at Fernbrook Family Center. As part of my role, I also provide telehealth services to children and their families, telemental health services. And I was raised in a small town in northern Minnesota, much like Casson. So I come to the table with that experience as well, in a town that mental health really wasn't talked about very often. I studied developmental psychology in a graduate doctoral program in about an hour west of Chicago at Northern Illinois University. I'm also a parent of a very spirited kindergartner, and I have lived experience in this topic as well. So in our about hour and a half together tonight, we're going to be challenging the stigma around mental illness or mental health conditions or disorders or issues, and learn some ways that we can learn to help challenge that stigma and reduce it in our communities and in our homes. And part of that will be learning just some of the basics about, well, what is mental health really, and what are some common mental health conditions and what do they look like. And we'll also learn some basics about how mental and physical health are intertwined and really interdependent. A lot of the content that I'm bringing tonight comes from these organizations here. I highly recommend seeking out these organizations when you're looking for information about mental health. And I wanted to start with the wise words of Oprah. So many people live in shame, hiding their struggles, not seeking help. We, as a culture, have not fully acknowledged how much help is needed. The only real shame is on us for not being willing to speak openly, for continuing to deny that mental health is related to our overall health. We need to start talking, and we need to start now. So let's talk. So what is mental health? Really, it's not complicated. It's a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to their community. And what is stigma? Well, stigma can be present. It can affect people in a variety of ways. Of course, tonight we're talking about mental health stigma, but there can be stigma around your socioeconomic status, the language you speak, your education level, your religion, your sexual orientation, your identity, these sorts of things. And really, when we say stigma, we mean a mark of shame or discredit, a set of negative and unfair beliefs that a society has about something, or a feeling of shame or judgment from someone else. And what does this look like? Well, it can mean that some people are excluding or avoiding other people after they learn that they have a mental health diagnosis, or that they view as differently, or when they don't fully understand them and maybe they don't know what to say to them, and so they avoid them. It can be using labels like calling somebody crazy or a lunatic. It can be a set of beliefs like that if you learn somebody that has a mental health condition, they're disclosing this to you, you just think they're trying to seek attention, or believing that people with a mental illness, such as depression, are really just lazy and they need to get over it. And it means that people with mental illness are more likely to be criminalized, that is, to end up in our prison industrial complex system, be overrepresented in our prison systems, due really to their mental health rather than receiving the treatment that they need. And stigma can feel like, for people who are facing it, for people who have mental health conditions and are struggling with their mental health, it can feel like feelings of shame, being ashamed of struggling with their mental health, feeling bad, guilty, or even, avoiding taking time off from work when they're struggling with their symptoms. It could be, a teenager feeling embarrassed and not wanting to go in for help to the local mental health agency or clinic because they don't want to be seen. They don't want anybody they know to see them walking in. It could be people feeling afraid that others are going to view them differently, not as good or less than they were before, fearing judgment if they're going to share their story and be open about it, or just in general being uncomfortable talking to loved ones, friends, and family about mental health, and at times when we're feeling like we need some extra support for our mental health. So I would like you to, for a moment, close your eyes or find a soft gaze in the room and take a moment to bring to mind the image of a person with mental illness. And try to make this vivid in your mind. So what are they wearing? How old are they? Where are they? Who are they with? What are they doing? And if you brought to mind somebody who is homeless, or a veteran, or Halloween happened last weekend, and all of these horror movies drive me up the wall when they are set in a psychiatric facility, such as a Michael Myers. If these are the images that came to your mind, it's okay. And that's very common. That's usually what we see when we think of mental illness in society and in the media that we consume. But hopefully we can get to a point where when we think of somebody struggling with their mental health, we see our neighbor. We see a mom, we see a teacher, we see a student, a niece or a nephew, a grandparent, or ourselves, right? Just everyday people. But maybe you brought to mind a celebrity or somebody famous who has been open about their struggles with mental health. So here's a set of famous people, actors, athletes, musicians, for example, that have been open about their mental health exactly for that reason, to help to reduce the stigma and show that anybody can have a mental health condition and anybody can thrive. Okay, so to think a little bit more about some of these common myths or misconceptions about mental health struggles, diagnoses, mental illness, whatever you'd like to call it, we're going to do some fact and fiction. So quiz yourself as we go through and see if you can, make the call if this is a fact that I'm sharing or if it's really a myth or fiction. So fact or fiction, people with mental illness are dangerous or violent. This is fiction. The fact is that actually the vast majority of people living with mental health conditions are no more violent than anyone else, and people with mental health conditions are much more likely to actually be the victims of crime and not the perpetrators. So although we see in the news, when some mass tragedy, shooting, something like this happens, oftentimes mental illness is the focus of the conversation and kind of what's to blame. And that kind of contributes to the stigma when a lot of people think that people with mental health conditions are dangerous or scary or violent. And really, statistically speaking, that is not the case. Fact or fiction? People with mental illness will never get better. Well, of course, this is also fiction. The fact is that for some people, a mental illness may be a lifelong condition, like diabetes. But as with diabetes, proper treatment enables many people with a mental illness to lead fulfilling and productive lives. Fact or fiction? Mental illness is a sign of weakness. I think we could probably see a pattern here. That is fiction. The fact is that a mental illness is not caused by personal weakness, and it also can't be cured by positive thinking or by willpower. A person needs proper treatment in order to care for their mental health. Fact or fiction? Mental illness can't affect me. This too is fiction. Although there are genetic and environmental factors that make it more or less likely that a person is susceptible to having struggles with their mental health or to reach the criteria of having a mental health diagnosis, the fact is that mental illness can affect anybody. And while, it can affect people of all ages and races and income levels, sometimes that idea that mental illness shouldn't be affecting me can get in the way of people seeking treatment. And I speak from personal experience when I say that. I come from, I had a regular upbringing. I felt privileged as a kid, straight A student, Minnesota All-State Choir, all these sorts of things. And I also was struggling with depression and anxiety and didn't know it until the birth of my child. And then it came to light that this is something that I should address. But for all of those years prior, this sort of feeling, this shouldn't be happening to me. I can get over this. I have so much to be grateful for, right? A person like me doesn't struggle with depression or anxiety or have a mental illness, right? In reality, it doesn't matter how, what your background is, what you have going for you, what you're doing. It can affect anybody at any time, and that's okay. So now that we've challenged some of these kind of misconceptions about mental health, I do want to define, what am I talking about when I say a mental health disorder, a mental health condition, or mental illness. And really these phrases, these terms are interchangeable, and it's kind of personal preference, what people choose to, which term they choose to use to describe their condition or their experience. And there is wide variation in terms of what this can look like for folks, right? But kind of some of the themes throughout the various diagnoses are you're going to have disruptions in mood, thought, behavior, relationships, and especially these sorts of disruptions get in the way of your ability to go about your daily tasks or to just, have some, your daily functioning is impaired. The symptoms can vary in terms of their severity, and they look different depending on diagnoses, and even in the same diagnosis, like depression, for example, the symptoms can look even very different. So even though we might think of depression and think of that, sad and weepy and that sort of thing, somebody might have depression and their main symptom is apathy, or not feeling, or being very angry and irritable. It can look different. But nonetheless, no matter what the symptoms are within that specific diagnosis, they're frequent, those symptoms. They're also persistent, so lasting for, at least 2 weeks, sometimes a month, depending on which sort of diagnosis we're talking about. And they also are causing distress to that person. It would be better if those symptoms weren't there. Among children, this also might look a little bit different. So some of the things to look out for with children, especially because they can't tell us what they're going through the way that adults can a lot of the time. We're looking for behaviors that are really unexpected for their age, especially if a child is acting or appearing much younger than same age peers. This also can look like not meeting certain developmental milestones, such as being able to self-regulate their emotions or interacting with peers and these sorts of things. And again, just as we were talking about on the slide previous, these symptoms are persistent. They're not fleeting. So, it's really common for infants and even 2 or 3-year-olds to go through just kind of rapid periods of brain growth. So in the first 3 years of life, the brain is growing very rapidly, but it kind of grows in spurts. And if anybody has an infant or a toddler, you might recognize that sometimes they're going through a phase where they're just very fussy or very clingy or regressing, and suddenly they're not walking anymore and they want to sit more, things like this. And so these phases that might last a week or 2, that's usually not what we're talking about when we talk about these differences or regression in behavior and things like that, because sometimes when kids are going through these kind of spurts of brain growth, they're kind of just going through this leap and it's a phase. But instead, this is going to be lasting at least a few weeks or longer. And it's going to, these symptoms, these behaviors, whatever is displayed, is also going to interfere with them being able to do things that are appropriate for their age. So If we're talking about infants, that would be bonding with their caregiver. That would be being able to be soothed by their caregiver, periods and changing between eating and sleeping, these sorts of things, and exploring their environment. For children, we're talking about, being able to function in school, being able to get along with peers, and these sorts of things. Okay. And it's also important to know that mental health conditions really can emerge at any time in a person's life. About 50% of the time, we're going to see that by adolescence, that's when a mental health condition is going to emerge. So about 50% of mental health conditions are going to emerge by adolescence, and more like 75% of the time, they're going to emerge by early adulthood, so say the mid-20s or so. So that's a really important time for being able to recognize the signs and symptoms of a mental health condition. But as I said, they can arise really at any time. And sometimes if it's not till much later that somebody is having signs and symptoms that they're aware of their mental health condition, it also could be that they were present sooner, but those signs and symptoms were missed. And as I mentioned briefly before, mental health conditions and really just our social and emotional development, generally speaking, is influenced by a number of factors. And so it's really not this nature versus nurture debate anymore in understanding this. Science has come a long way, and now we can look at the function and the structure of the brain. We can map out genes, and we can see epigenetic changes, or the way that the environment turns on and off certain genes, these sorts of things. And we know that it's always a combination of both. It's a combination of genetic and biological factors, and it's also a combination of the environment and stressors and these sorts of things. So they're all working together to influence, whether somebody is susceptible to having a mental health condition, and then whether, they're going to start to struggle with their mental health. The National Institute on Mental Health estimates that tens of millions of Americans are affected by mental illness every year. And that's about 1 in 4 Americans, 1 in 5, depending on which statistic you're looking at, but 1 in 4 or 5 have a mental health condition. It's about 1 in 6 or 7 of children. So in a typical classroom, that's at least a few kiddos, right? 1 in 10 Americans have a serious mental health condition, something that requires ongoing treatment and vigilance and that sort of thing, something more like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And it's also important to know that mental illness, specifically depression, is the leading cause of disability worldwide. And finally, a mental health condition is treatable. And sadly, many do not receive the treatment that they need. And actually the kind of lag time between when symptoms first emerge and when somebody gets treatment is about 11 years. People wait usually around 11 years on average to receive treatment. And that's not necessarily by choice. Stigma plays a part in that because it feels difficult to talk about, and it's hard to reach out for help, right? And in some cases, we don't have the services that we need, or there's barriers, and that's why we're here to talk to you tonight, so that we can help with that, right? Because we don't want to see that only half of children are getting treated for their mental health conditions, and for adults, that's 60%, up to 60% of adults or more aren't receiving treatment for their mental health conditions. So why should we treat a mental health condition? Well, first of all, you feel better after you get treatment. And there's also a ripple effect. So it's not just the person dealing with the mental health condition that is affected by their condition and their symptoms, right? There are a whole other host of things that happen. So their family is affected, the community at large. In fact, we know that for children who are dealing with mental health conditions, and especially those really disruptive looking types of behaviors and conduct problems and that sort of thing, they're kind of on the fast track to prison, unfortunately. And so if we intervene early, we can help to disrupt that, right? And the community at large is safer and healthier and happier and more educated. And so this just has a ripple effect if we speak up and talk about mental health, and if we take care of our mental health. I'm going to speak a little bit more of this later. Actually, somebody else is going to talk about it. I'll share a video. But another reason why it's so important to take care of our mental health and not leave it untreated is when we think about caregivers. So for caregivers or parents who are dealing with the stress of a mental health condition that can get in the way of our parenting, it can be very stressful and something called toxic stress for the children in that household. And we know a lot about this now, actually, in that these adverse childhood experiences, they're called, or ACEs, caregiver mental illness is one of those. And the more ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, that a person has, the more likely they are to experience physical ailments, physical health ailments, heart disease, diabetes, all sorts of things. It even predicts early death. And so it is very important that we take care of our mental health, especially if we have a caregiving role, because it's not just us that we're looking out for. So now we've learned a little bit about what mental health is and what stigma is, and what do we do now? How can we reduce stigma in our community? Well, I think that the most important thing and kind of the easiest change to make is just to be mindful of the words that we use. And, a lot of these words that I have listed here, they're really pervasive in our society. It's just, this is how we talk, and we don't think a whole lot of it. But as we'll hear in a moment, these sorts of words or phrases can actually feel very harmful to those who are experiencing mental health difficulties. So rather than saying he's crazy or she's a psycho, can we use a different word? Can we use a more descriptive word? We're able to inhibit ourselves from, say, using curse words in the workplace or in church or where have you. We can do the same when it comes to this sort of language, right? Don't use the R word. Do we need to say that somebody suffers from depression when really we don't know if they're suffering? They might be thriving and in remission and on the other side of it, and they wouldn't describe their situation as suffering, right? And not describing people in terms of their disability, in terms of their mental illness. We want to put the person first. So not calling somebody a depressive or a schizophrenic. Instead, this is a person with depression. My sister has depression. She has a depression diagnosis, right? Another one that we might hear is like, oh, I'm so OCD. I always have to have my room clean. Well, if you have obsessive compulsive disorder, like, absolutely, that's great if you want to talk about it and be open about it. But if we're just using that kind of as a slang term to mean that I like things a certain way, then that can be kind of harmful to people who have OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder and who experience debilitating symptoms because of that. Another thing that I personally have had to learn is, how do we support somebody? What are some phrases that we can use to support somebody who is struggling with their mental health? Or even if they're just feeling sad or feeling anxious or feeling angry, what can we do, right? So some things that we shouldn't say are, you just need to look on the bright side. If somebody says, you know what, I took this questionnaire online and it says that I might have depression. Well, it's not that bad. Your life could be worse. Look at all you have to be thankful for. Or no, good vibes only here. Or everything happens for a reason. That's just God's plan. You need to deal with it. Trust. Of course, that might be comforting to some people, but to some people, these sorts of phrases might actually be really invalidating to them and make it harder for them to want to continue to talk. And the nice thing about talking about your emotions and your struggles and hard thoughts and things that you're going through, stressors, is then you're not alone with them, right? And so if we say these things, it really shuts down that conversation, and it's hard for that person to continue to talk with you. So if you want to be somebody that other people can come to, if you want people to trust you with that information, these sorts of things might not be what you want to say to them. Some of these ones at the end here, especially quit crying or you're okay. I'm thinking more of children in that realm. Excuse me. And so, there are some things that we can do to support their emotional well-being as well. And I'll talk about that some more in a different talk on a different night. We could say instead, if somebody opens up to us and is telling us how stressed they are about work or something that's happened, it's just, that sounds really hard. Thank you for opening up to me, or oh, this really stinks, or that this just sucks. I'm so sorry. How can I help? Or I can't imagine what you must be going through or what that feels like. Maybe you can send somebody a text message if you know that they've been having a hard time, and just say, I don't know what to say, but just know that I'm here for you. I'm thinking of you. These are some things that would be more supportive to somebody who's struggling with their mental health or their emotions. Another thing that we can do, not only in thinking about what we can say, but what can we say to other people when we hear in conversation them saying things that might be harmful to other people who are struggling with their mental health, things that are perpetuating that stigma. So we can speak out. Thanksgiving's just around the corner, right? We might be hearing certain types of jokes or, family members talking about so-and-so, and we want to say something about it this time. So here are some phrases to try. And I actually recommend, if you've never talked about this before, practice in front of a mirror so you can get a little more comfortable with it. But you can say something like, what you said just bothers me, or I don't find that funny, or I think that's insensitive, or do you know anybody with a mental illness? Because I just watched this talk the other night and this gal told me that, right? Or just, I don't agree with that. We actually don't use that word in this house. I'd prefer if you don't use it. I know lots of people still do, but it's actually not okay to use that word anymore. That comment is harmful to people with mental illness. These are some good places to start. A little more about this. I'm going to share this video from makeitokay.org, and this is a wonderful organization that's Health Partners Minnesota is a part of, and this website is just chock full of lots of great stories, firsthand perspectives of Minnesotans who are sharing their stories and their struggles with mental health. So fingers crossed that this works.
We just had the 2014 election, and of course we had certain events happen. And I'm reading my Twitter line, and I'm kind of putting my face in my hands, because what I hear is, we call it ableist language. What I hear is people saying, well, here we go, those people are crazy, or, oh, it's going to be so bipolar now with the Congress, or, it's just psychotic how these people act. And I'm sitting there going, I understand that you're upset about, or not, about how the events turn out, but why are you using this type of language to describe it? That's something that's really hard for me. So what I tweeted was, can we not use the words crazy, psychotic, bipolar when venting our frustrations about what's been going on in current events? Because it makes me feel like I'm being put in this box, and the box is only negative. It's like, oh, here's a label of bipolar, here's a label of crazy, but we're gonna put it in this situation to describe the worst thing ever. And it's like, no, it's not like that. Living with mental illness, it's hard, but I wouldn't say it's the worst thing ever. I can think of a lot worse things that I'd have to deal with, I'd have to cope with.
Okay, I have a couple more for you.
Like a lot of people living with mental illness, I've unfortunately had to hear some hurtful language. I think one of the more common one in our society is crazy. I was talking with someone and sharing the fact that, I have a mental illness diagnosis, and the response was like, no, you're not crazy, Dan. And I go, I never said I was crazy. I said I have a mental illness diagnosis. And, that association with the word crazy and mental illness it's extremely tough.
A lot of times they don't know that I have bipolar. And so they'll say, well, what do you do for work? And I say, well, I work with people with mental illness and try to support them. And I get comments like, oh, that must be a challenge. And then I like to tell them it's not a challenge because I myself have a mental illness. And it sets them back a little bit because they're kind of like, oh, you do too? And it's like, well, yeah, I do, and they go, well, you don't look mentally ill. And I'm like, well, what does mental illness look like?
Okay, all great reminders for us. I wanted to share one additional video right now. This is a video with Chris Hubbard, who is an NFL offensive tackle, and he is sharing some of his experiences.
This is home for me, man, and a lot of memories, a lot of friends, a lot of family, and it's just a blessing to be back here to see Columbus grow in such a way.
Well, if you like seeing classic rare cars, drinking a cup of joe, and supporting a good cause, well, you're in luck. The Cars and Coffee Rally in support of mental health awareness is making its way to Columbus. It's hosted by Cleveland Browns offensive tackle Chris Hubbard. He joins us now to tell us all about it.
I was so excited to hear about Chris Hubbard coming to town because, people know who he is. He's kind of like a hometown hero. He went to Carver High School. And the fact that he's brave enough to talk about such a taboo subject as mental illness, that's even greater. I think there are a lot more ears that listen. It's like, wow, you came from here and you're struggling with a mental illness, but you're successful and you're thriving, so I can do well. And students and the community in general, they tend to listen to stuff like that.
Just seeing the high school the way it is now, it's emotional because you've seen how much it has grown. Bro, it's way better than what we had at all. Way better. No, man, we had none of this. None of this. We were told that if you're going through something, you might want to push through it. Nothing's wrong with you. Be a man. And we never realize it until we get to this deep point in life to where we're like, man, something is going on wrong with me. Another note, man, I want y'all to know about mental health too, man. Mental health is serious, man. Whatever, like, if you're dealing with like anything as far as like depression or anxiety or anything like that in your life, like mental health, like I've been through it myself, because football like really wears on you, man. It really does. Like it takes you away from your family most of all, and then as well as like you putting your body on the line too. So every day you come to work, man, you got to deal with these hostile environments, going through different stages in life. You might be dealing with depression or anxiety, but I had to get some help.
It really touched his heart to be able to go back and have that opportunity to kind of let these young men know, hey, listen, I'm just like you. I saw how it's important to him to break down that stigma, especially in the African-American community, especially African-American males, on how we're just supposed to hold everything up and just suck it up. That's that old school mentality where it actually builds up inside and it creates a lot of stress, which then turns into the depression.
Take care of yourself. Talk to somebody if you're going through it, a counselor, anything, because like you might not know you're going through it, but at that time I was like, man, I'm a dude, man, I'm a man, like I can deal with it myself. But at the same time, I was losing weight. I was 305, I lost weight in like a month, bro. Like I went down to like 275. So I had to get all my weight back from dealing with stress and anxiety and going through the different roles and depression and stuff like that.
You can see on a daily basis the issues that we have to deal with in regards to mental health. And for him to take on that issue, it means a great deal to us.
Seeing the young students here today at Carver Columbus High School, I saw myself sitting in one of those seats. And just to be able to talk among those guys brought me back a lot of memories of how I was in school and how I dealt with a lot of things going on.
We hear about bullying, we hear about peer pressure, we hear about problems with people being bullied because of their sexuality.
Just seeing my friend grow through that, yeah, it was pretty tough. He liked other men, so that's kind of why they picked on him, because of what he went through. But he dealt with a lot of things at home as well, too. It's not just as far as bullying at school, but he dealt with everything at home. Like, I used to talk to him and try to figure out what's going on, but, you know, he was just so sheltered to the fact that, you know, he wasn't going to let that come out. He was always holding something behind and just keeping it to himself. And then next thing you know, that suicide happened, so.
In my experience, talking to African-American youth, it's just overcoming that stigma. Whereas, you know, maybe their parents may not necessarily believe or understand what mental illness is. They kind of get it and they want to get help, but they don't really know who to talk to about getting help and where to go to get help.
He opened my eyes to a lot of it. Now I understand it's not, like I said, somebody's crazy.
Oh,
you know,
no.
that's the first thing.
No,
Oh, she's
not.
mental.
Yeah.
That's what you think.
Right.
That's what my thought process was a long time ago. But when he started, it's like, oh wow, it just brought more awareness to me. Really did. It helped me to understand more.
And so where will the proceeds go?
The proceeds will go to NAMI. Everything that we're raising will go straight to them. And we just want to see it happen and raise as much as possible.
Great. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yes, the Cars and Coffee Rally. We hope everybody will come out and support mental health.
I'm hyped to be here, man. I'm excited to be here. Man, this is what it's all about, man.
We were out there 6:30 in the morning. The NAMI crew came through. We set up the table. Everybody started popping their hoods, getting the music going. Chris was in heaven.
So
yeah, man.
We got the jerseys.
We had a great day in regards to fundraising and people supporting the event.
Appreciate what you're doing.
Yes, sir, man. I'm glad you brought the rise out here, man. You know, we're just trying to raise that awareness for mental health and just have a good time as well.
You know, it takes a brave man to really, especially a football player, an NFL player, to come out and kind of admit to having mental illness issues and, most importantly, finding help for it. And there's a lot of them out there that have these issues. And I'm very proud of Chris being brave enough to really shed light on it, but then also tell his personal story about that.
I got you, bro. I got you. Come on, look at the camera, look. Anyone that's dealing with mental health today, just know your voice is always meant to be heard. You're not alone in this world. There's a million people that's going through the same thing you may be going through. And there's many ways and different things that you can do in your life that can help you get out of that depression, that hole that you may be in. Just know that we are here to help you, and NAMI is going to continue to help as much as possible.
Okay. It's a powerful story, right? We also have a NAMI chapter here in Minnesota, so Google that if that's something that you'd like to learn more about. Of course, that's where I'm drawing some of my information from and stories from today. Okay. So now we have understood mental health through the lens of some other people, and we've challenged some of our preconceived notions and some of the myths and some of that stigma around mental health. To take it a little bit further, it's, knowledge is power, right? So let's learn a little bit more about what is actually going on in our minds and our bodies. How can we understand these variations in mental health functioning and difficulty? So I'm going to share some videos to teach us a little bit about the autonomic nervous system and the stress response. We're also going to learn a little bit about something called brain plasticity or neuroplasticity, and hopefully this information will help you to understand your brain and your body a little bit better. So what's happening when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling stressed, and what are some of those reasons why sometimes prolonged stress results in mental illness, for example. So how does stress affect your brain?
Are you sleeping restlessly, feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy and focus, like when you're playing a competitive sport or have to speak in public. But when it's continuous, the kind most of us face day in and day out, it actually begins to change your brain. Chronic stress, like being overworked or having arguments at home, can affect brain size, its structure, and how it functions, right down to the level of your genes. Stress begins with something called the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis, a series of interactions between endocrine glands in the brain and on the kidney, which controls your body's reaction to stress. When your brain detects a stressful situation, your HPA axis is instantly activated and releases a hormone called cortisol, which primes your body for instant action. But high levels of cortisol over long periods of time wreak havoc on your brain. For example, chronic stress increases the activity level and number of neural connections in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. And as levels of cortisol rise, electric signals in your hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with learning, memories, and stress control, deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis, so when it weakens, so does your ability to control your stress. That's not all, though. Cortisol can literally cause your brain to shrink in size. Too much of it results in the loss of synaptic connections between neurons and the shrinking of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that regulates behaviors like concentration, decision-making, judgment, and social interaction. It also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus. This means chronic stress might make it harder for you to learn and remember things, and also set the stage for more serious mental problems like depression and eventually Alzheimer's disease. The effects of stress may filter right down to your brain's DNA. An experiment showed that the amount of nurturing a mother rat provides its newborn baby plays a part in determining how that baby responds to stress later in life. The pups of nurturing moms turned out less sensitive to stress because their brains developed more cortisol receptors, which stick to cortisol and dampen the stress response. The pups of negligent moms had the opposite outcome, and so became more sensitive to stress throughout life. These are considered epigenetic changes, meaning that they affect which genes are expressed without directly changing the genetic code. And these changes can be reversed if the moms are swapped. But there's a surprising result. The epigenetic changes caused by one single mother rat were passed down to many generations of rats after her. In other words, the results of these actions were inheritable. It's not all bad news, though. There are many ways to reverse what cortisol does to your stressed brain. The most powerful weapons are exercise and meditation, which involves breathing deeply and being aware and focused on your surroundings. Both of these activities decrease your stress and increase the size of the hippocampus, thereby improving your memory. So don't feel defeated by the pressures of daily life. Get in control of your stress before it takes control of you.
Okay. And of course, exercising, meditating, doing mindfulness sometimes aren't enough for some people, and some extra steps are needed, such as psychotherapy or medication, and that's okay too. But hopefully we've learned a little bit about how our body is tied so tightly to our experiences and how that stress response really alters our body and our brain functioning, all of these things. And so it's a way to really understand that when we're having struggles and we're having a hard time coping with stress and we're having a frequent stress response that we can't get under control, it's not necessarily our fault. It's not because of a lack of willpower. It's the way that our bodies are made, right? And so is this video that I just showed talked a little bit about that study with the rats, right, and the mothering rats and the changes to the pups. And I want to share now the effects of toxic stress or adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and really what they were talking about with the rats has been replicated in humans, and this has some pretty striking implications for health across the lifespan.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Okay. One thing that I would like to add, if you caught at the end that he mentioned that more schools are becoming trauma-informed, I wanted to clarify that trauma is a term that is used to describe toxic stress or adverse childhood experiences at times, and not necessarily the type of trauma we think of as a single traumatic, scary, life-threatening event. Okay, so I wanted to also share some more about what's going on inside of our bodies. Why is it that that stress, childhood adversity, these sorts of things have such an impact on our bodily symptoms, such that they can lead to cardiovascular disease and such. Immune functioning also is part of that equation. I won't be touching on that tonight, but heart rate variability is a really powerful indicator of how we're doing, and it's something that we can actually kind of hack into through deep breathing to help to calm our system. So I'm going to share this final video with you.
If you think your heart beats at a regular interval like a metronome, think again. We have a natural variability in the spacing between our heartbeats. This phenomenon is called heart rate variability, and HRV for short. It says a lot about our bodily systems, which is why athletes and health enthusiasts alike have been so interested in this, and why you should be too. Simply put, HRV is a measurement of the balance between your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. These two systems make up the autonomic nervous system, which handles about 90% of the body's involuntary functions. The sympathetic nervous system is what kicks into gear when we are stressed or in danger. We sweat, our heart rate goes up, and the interval between our heartbeats goes down. We produce norepinephrine, and our body is primed to either fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system is pretty much the opposite, and it functions like a brake by disabling the sympathetic nervous system. Dubbed the rest and digest response, it activates when we are in a relaxed state and engages processes such as the production of saliva and peristalsis. It uses acetylcholine to make the heartbeat slower and with greater intervals. When in balance, they therefore produce high HRV through a more variable heart rate. The more variable your heart rate, the more you are able to readily respond to your environment and switch gears between these two systems. HRV is used as a health marker. It generally decreases with age. High HRV is an indication of cardiovascular health, fitness, willpower, calm and positive emotions, and your ability to handle stress and exercise. Low HRV is related to inflammation, chronic stress, chronic pain, depression, cancer, and low emotional flexibility. HRV values have actually been used to predict injury recovery and cancer outcomes. One sports scientist has been able to predict very accurately the point differential in wrestling matches based on pre-match HRV readings. Elite athletes use daily HRV measurements to adjust their training regimen and prevent overtraining. There's also an interesting link between HRV and willpower. HRV is a huge predictor of persistence and self-control, and it increases when exerting self-regulation. This mechanism is called the pause and plan response. By changing our physiology, we can manipulate our HRV, and the way we do this is through breathing, and what is called resonance frequency breathing. Combining this breathing with a biofeedback device to monitor your HRV in real time is called HRV training. By slowing down your breathing, you can activate the parasympathetic nervous system and raise your HRV, which causes your heart rate and blood pressure to synchronize with your respiration, resulting in a state that the HeartMath Institute calls coherence. The optimal rate of breathing that produces coherence and increases your HRV the most differs from individual to individual and is called your resonance frequency. For most people, it will be around 5.5 seconds. Doing minimum 10 minutes of this breathing every day, you can develop the skill of producing a state of coherence at any given moment. Activating this state, you can get into the zone, so to speak, and increase your performance for single actions such as swinging a golf club or hitting a baseball. HRV training has shown to be incredibly beneficial for kids with overactive sympathetic nervous systems and resulting belly aches. After a few weeks of daily training, they show massive improvements in their baseline HRV and are able to function much better. Some autoimmune conditions related to the gut have been helped by this type of training as well, as our gut permeability is closely related to our parasympathetic nervous system. Other benefits of HRV breathing include pain management in conditions such as fibromyalgia and chronic muscle pain. It can help with asthma, depression, hypertension, and self-control. It's also great for stress management. Around 20% of people will feel sleepy from following this breathing rhythm, which makes it a great tool for falling asleep quickly at night. If you want to experience this state of coherence, I've created 2 videos for you to practice this breathing. One is suitable for the morning or day and looks like this, and one is made for nighttime with minimal blue light if you'd prefer doing it right before bed. The interest in HRV has increased substantially the past decade, and several consumer technologies have emerged to help measure your personal HRV metrics. The most accessible way to accurately measure your HRV is to get a polar heart rate chest strap and connect it with an app called Elite HRV. Elite HRV also sells a device called CoreSense, which you stick a finger into to measure your HRV. The previously mentioned HeartMath Institute has created the M-Wave device and the inner balance sensor to provide biofeedback as you perform HRV training. The Aura Ring is a sleep tracker that shows you an average HRV value from your night of sleep. I've added links to these in the video description below, and also links to a few more resources on HRV if you're interested in learning more about the subject. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not endorsing any of these products. However, it's interesting to note that there are so many products out there that can help us to get in tune with how our body is functioning. And I want to say that if anything I have shared to this point about adverse childhood experiences and their link to health outcomes, if any of that has touched a nerve with you, we can take a moment and breathe in for 5 seconds and out. And repeat as needed. All right. Neuroplasticity is a term that describes how we create new connections between neurons. For the sake of time, I think I'm going to skip this video right here, but of course you see it's called neuroplasticity. Go ahead and put it in YouTube. You can watch it on your own. Short little video, and really just explains how with more experience practicing a particular skill, the stronger those neural connections will get, the different areas of our brain that are talking to one another, those connections are going to strengthen, and then we're able to more automatically and easily use that skill. And unfortunately, that's the case for if we have adverse childhood experiences, if we're in chronic stress and we have, say, that amygdala or HPA axis, all these systems that are being triggered very frequently, those connections are going to strengthen, right? But neuroplasticity is also a good thing, and why things like psychotherapy are useful or mindfulness are useful, because we can create new pathways and we can strengthen those pathways, which means that those old pathways are going to get weaker and they're not going to get used as much. And so I encourage you to watch this video as well if you want more information about that. Another video that I recommend is this TED Talk by the first Surgeon General of California, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and she's talking in a little more depth about the adverse childhood experiences study and what they're doing in California to address adverse childhood experiences and just give you a little more in-depth look about that. Okay, so in a nutshell, what does all of this mean that we've just talked about? Well, our nervous system can overreact to everyday stress. It reacts to a bear standing in front of you the same way it would a test that you have tomorrow, or a work deadline, or something similar to that. Somebody cutting you off in traffic, right? Our nervous system is going to react to that. If we have a frequent stress response that's activated because of a stressful environment, stressful experiences, and we don't employ strategies to help calm our body, this can lead to mental and physical illnesses. So this is one piece of the puzzle, if you will, in understanding why we have mental health conditions, and why some people struggle with mental health, and why sometimes we struggle at one time in our life and not another, these sorts of things. There are also genetic, and of course we learned about epigenetic factors that make us more or less susceptible as well, especially childhood. All of them is worry, anxiety, or fear that's strong enough to interfere with daily activities. In addition, this can include having feelings of apprehension or dread, feeling really tense or jumpy, having a startled response, feeling restless or irritable, just having this feeling that something bad is going to happen, and always kind of being ready for the worst thing to happen, or planning for the worst thing to happen obsessively, having uncontrollable thoughts of worries and the like. Anxiety disorders, because of what we've learned about the autonomic nervous system, anxiety disorders they manifest a lot in physical symptoms. In fact, people with anxiety disorders are more likely to visit the doctor's office more frequently than people without anxiety disorders, thinking that they're having physical ailments, when really these physical symptoms are just a symptom of the anxiety. So this includes pounding or racing heart, shortness of breath, feeling like a lump in your throat, or like you're choking, sweating, tremors, shaking, headaches, insomnia, not being able to sleep, and a lot of gastrointestinal distress, such as having an upset stomach or diarrhea. These are also common with anxiety and stress. And that has to do with the activation of our autonomic nervous system. And a bit about depression then, which is the next most common diagnosis. So there are different types of depressive diagnoses, but in general, again, what you're gonna see is changes in sleep, appetite, or movement. And I say changes in because this could be sleeping more than usual, or not being able to sleep, eating more than usual, or not having an appetite, being kind of lethargic or not being able to get out of bed, having reduced concentration or energy, a lack of pleasure, interest in doing things that you used to enjoy, maybe a sense of self-worth, or feelings like that this is just hopeless, that you feel guilty about having these struggles. It can also manifest in physical aches and pains, and sometimes thoughts of death or suicide, or suicidal ideation. So I want to pause here and say that if you are experiencing any suicidal ideation, please dial 911. Here's a link to the crisis response team. You can also text HOME to 741741 to be connected to the crisis text line in Minnesota. And let's listen to another person's story to understand depression a little bit more.
Okay, good. It's been a struggle for me to learn that I have depression while working in that stressful environment. And it's also been a privilege because I can meet my patients halfway and understand where they're coming from. It's been difficult at times to see how different people in the population are affected by stigma from mental health issues. You can sometimes hear things like, I don't want to take care of that person. They have a history of bipolar. They're crazy. And And I don't think people realize how damaging that is, just that phrase. So it's so important for us to leave our judgment behind.
And it was at the peak change in temperature, then we knew it was a 2-to-1 ratio.
When I thought about my depression, I always thought it was very situational. So anyone who went through what I went through would have been depressed. Well, I was 9 when my father died. We worked with social services for many years, and I went into foster care. It wasn't until years later, when I'd had my own children and when I started to watch my children grow and worry about, am I loving them the right way, that I all of a sudden felt this huge loss. Like, where was this for me? I just never felt happy. And I was doing all the right things. I would, read to my kids, and I would cook nice meals, and I would exercise, and I gardened, and I just felt nothing. And I could watch my kids, and I could feel pride in them, but I didn't always feel connected to everybody. And I still had never gone to counseling, never looked at things that had happened in my youth. I thought a lot about suicide. And I had said something to a friend, and the friend had gotten worried about me and had called the police. This female police officer shows up. She put me in the back of the police car, and she drove me to Regions. And I thought, well, I'm just going to tell the truth. Okay, sure. I tried to kill myself. It didn't work. I'm okay. And I just remember this one social worker coming down to do an interview, and she looked at me and she goes, "You lack complete insight into your illness." It was true. I mean, I really had no concept of what was happening to me. I remember my husband leaving, the doctor assuring him that I was going to be well cared for. So it kind of took me right back to that place I was when I was 15 and really, really depressed. I had such fantastic care at the hospital. I spent a little over a week there. And I did try a couple medications like most people do for antidepressants. It never seems like we get the right one right off the bat. So I don't have a strong opinion either way. I sort of feel like they're the professionals, and I want them to take a look and see what would be best for me. Because if my endocrinologist tells me that I need to take insulin, I will take my insulin. If my psychiatrist tells me that I need to take a medication for depression, then I need to take that medication. I started sewing again. I started spinning yarn again. I like to do a lot of yoga. Another thing I like to do is exercise. That's really important, the physical activity, because that releases all kinds of great chemicals and hormones in the body. And I think that was really valuable to have my family be a part of my recovery.
We survived it, and I'm amazed by you and what you've done to recover, to do the hard work that it takes.
I had been under the impression that you were just there for the diabetic reaction. And so it was kind of like the first time that I had really gotten to see you and realize what you were going through. And so it was scary in a sense, but...
So what about it was scary?
Well, the point, I guess the fact that realizing that it had happened to Mom and like somebody I know.
Did you feel embarrassed talking to your friends about where I was and what was happening to me?
At first, I thought it might have been embarrassing, but then I realized that really everybody has dealt with mental illness in some way or another.
Do you think that your friends now talk to you in a different way when they have issues because they feel like you have some different insight?
Well, when you're around the guys, you don't really talk really deep with your emotions, but I mean, they understand the history, and I guess if any of them had questions, they would, but nothing like that's come up so far.
I think as difficult as my illness has been for my children to understand, I think what it teaches them is that you don't have to be perfect ever to be loved, and that it's okay if it happens to you. And then I hope in turn they can support their friends, you know, they can support their children someday.
Okay, so that was Lisa's story. Next, I wanted to touch on post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. PTSD, perhaps one of the myths or the preconceptions that we have about it is that it mostly happens to veterans. Really, it can happen to anybody. And it's defined by lingering fear or anxiety or being upset and really bothered by experiencing a shocking, scary, or life-threatening event. And it's really important to note that that's in the eye of the beholder. It's how that person experiences that event. It's not necessarily how severe that event is itself to an outside observer, but instead what that experience was like for the person who lived it or witnessed it. It can be shown through symptoms such as re-experiencing that event, like having flashbacks or nightmares and lots of dreams about it, avoiding reminders of that event, feeling really physiologically aroused, such as that racing heart, sweating, heart palpitations, rapid breathing, these sorts of things, or just overreactive startle response and things like this when just hearing loud noises or seeing things that are a reminder. And that has to do with kind of the brain's alarm system kind of being turned on chronically because of that experience. It also is characterized by changing mood and cognitions or thought processes. And among children, we see more developmental regressions, such as bedwetting or not speaking as much anymore and these sorts of things. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, is something that we also might be aware of, but not quite sure that we know enough about it or not fully understand it. We also might hear the term ADD a lot more frequently. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder used to be called ADD, and it can either be presented by having a lot of trouble focusing and being very distractible, but not having that hyperactivity piece, that high energy, that go, like you're running on a motor. Or it could be the other way around, where it's really characterized by a child who is always on the go and has lots of energy and maybe has a hard time putting on the brakes, or it could be a combination of the two. So I'm going to share this video to describe this a little bit more for you.
Hi, we all have ADHD, and we're going to tell you a bit about it. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder.
Did you know that anyone can have ADHD, even adults? About 1 in 20 children have ADHD, which is more than 1 in every class. Someone in your family may even have it too.
If you have ADHD, you might feel like you have a lot more energy than others, find it hard to pay attention, get distracted easily, find it hard to sit still, or not shout out or interrupt others.
Lots of people feel like this sometimes, but for someone with ADHD, it might feel like this most or all of the time. This can't get in the way of doing important things, like in school with homework and friendships. This can sometimes get them into trouble more than others.
Not everyone with ADHD has the same difficulties. ADHD can appear in different ways at different times for different people. That's why sometimes it's hard to tell who has it.
Some people may also have difficulties with reading, spelling, or being clumsy. Some may have difficulties communicating with people or have bigger emotions than others, like feeling more worried, sad, or angry.
Scientists have found that the brains of people with ADHD can work in a special way, including parts of the brain that help with things like attention, stopping and waiting before doing things, and organising thoughts or actions.
For me, ADHD feels like you are watching TV, listening to music, and talking to someone all at the same time. It's really hard to know what to pay attention to.
A special doctor can tell if you have ADHD. They will speak to you, your family, and your teachers to find out more about you and think very carefully before deciding if somebody has ADHD or not. They will also talk about the type of help you might need.
Knowing that you have ADHD can help you and others understand you better. You might need help with things that you find hard, and that's okay. It's important to find out what these are and talk to your family, teacher, or doctor about it.
There are some things that you might be able to do to help yourself with support of your family and teachers. For example, taking breaks or having a chart of what you need to do can help some people. Eating well, trying to get a good night's sleep, and getting regular exercise is important too.
Some children with ADHD need medicine to help with their difficulties, and some do not. Not everything works for everyone, and nothing works all the time, so it's best to find things that suit you and that you enjoy too.
Scientists don't know what exactly causes ADHD yet, but they know that it's complicated, with lots of different things acting together, including genes, which are instruction manuals in our bodies that help make us who we are, and the environment, which are the different things that happen to us in our lives.
Although it can be hard sometimes, there are some good things about ADHD. It doesn't stop people from achieving their dreams and being successful. Lots of famous people, like some athletes and actors, have ADHD too. In fact,
ADHD helps me have amazing ideas.
I'm one of the funniest kids in school. I have lots more energy than others.
I have fun in everything I do.
I can think of more questions to ask teachers than any other person in my class.
ADHD is just one part of who you are, and it's okay to have ADHD.
Find out.
Okay. So hopefully that has helped you understand what ADHD is. I also want to share a bit of Melissa's story, who is sharing about having bipolar disorder. Tonight is all about learning from other people and their experiences.
When I meet somebody for the first time and I tell them I'm a college professor, they're like, oh, great, where do you teach? Where did you get your PhD? That's so great. And then if I introduce myself as, hi, my name is Melissa and I'm in recovery from bipolar disorder, oh, great. But when I try to tell people I am a college professor and I'm recovering from bipolar disorder, they cannot make that connection. To see both of those identities in one person, I've seen a lot of people struggle with it. It's pretty funny sometimes, actually. I was the smart fat kid in elementary school, and I must say I don't remember any particular depression or mood disorders when I was that young. Things were pretty okay until about my sophomore year in high school, and then I had an episode of pretty severe depression and had some eating disorder symptoms, got really, really thin. My mom took me to our general practitioner. His response to her was, don't do anything. Don't take her to a specialist. Don't do anything. Because if it gets out that she has a psychiatric diagnosis, she won't be able to get into a good college. So you don't want to tell anybody. So that was, I guess that was probably our first real brush with stigma. I went to college and that was very difficult. And I think that kind of brought to the forefront all the difficulties that I was having. I was really, really struggling with depression, having a hard time just getting up in the morning, having a hard time relating with other people, wanting more and more to turn to alcohol as a way to deal with things. Sophomore year in college, February of my sophomore year in college, I attempted suicide by overdosing. I ended up in the hospital in an inpatient psychiatric unit. And it was probably not a really sophisticated diagnostic process. The way I remember it is that the psychiatrist asked me, "Do you have mood swings?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he goes, "Oh, we'll put you on lithium then." So it wasn't a really sophisticated diagnostic process. But the good thing about it, I guess, was that lithium ended up being a pretty good medication for a while. The reason it's called bipolar is because the person has extreme moods that can range from being extremely depressed, having no energy, sad. And then the other pole of the bipolar would be the mania, manic episodes where the person, feels really high, and people can sometimes spend money very impulsively or make other kinds of impulsive decisions because they feel like they're invincible. Did pretty well in school overall. Got scholarships to go to graduate school, and then somewhere around the mid to late 90s, things really started to change, and I started to have a lot of problems with what would clinically be called ideas of reference, thinking that God was talking to me through the radio, thinking that God was telling me to kill myself or to kill other people, that kind of thing. That was terrifying. And then there's so many stereotypes about, people with mental illness committing acts of violence. I was really afraid that if I told people in my immediate environment, look, I'm having these thoughts, that I didn't know what would happen. I didn't want to find out. The psychiatrist who was treating me, he said, "You can expect never to experience happiness again because you're just not capable of it." I think mental illness, because the symptoms are manifested in behaviors, it's really not exactly like diabetes or heart disease. You hear people say that. It is a little bit different. And so the way that we talk about it and the way that we deal with it has to be a little bit different. The one thing I would say, though, is that a person who has bipolar disorder has no more reason to feel ashamed of what they're going through than a person who has breast cancer. I have been fortunate in that I've had a wonderful relapse prevention therapy group that's been very, very helpful. I've done some individual counseling, have had really good, really consistent psychiatric care. I also got connected to the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, which is a self-help group. When you're experiencing symptoms of psychosis, there's such a feeling of shame and such isolation and so much fear. And so having that support group available to go and talk about things reduced my own internalized stigma. American Indian culture to the well-being of these children. My first year here, there was a lot about entering, a different aspect of social work that was very stressful and anxiety-provoking. And fortunately, Augsburg had a good EAP program. An EAP is an employee assistance program, and it's often offered as an employee benefit. So I saw an EAP counselor, and he instructed me to make a list of 10 things that I could do if I was on campus and was feeling anxious. They're pretty simple things like, drink a glass of water, or, go for a walk, go for a walk around the community garden, simple things like that. But I still have that list, actually.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop it there for the sake of time. But if you want to learn more about Melissa's story or many other people's story with various mental health diagnoses, you can go to makeitokay.org. So again, here are the symptoms of bipolar disorder, although I believe that Melissa described it from her experience and from the clinical literature very well. So we're going to go ahead and skip through that. And I just want to end with a couple of messages. So I want to remind everybody that feelings and emotions are universal. So every human experiences feelings. We have basic emotions that have been shown starting in infancy and all over the world in every culture, those basic emotions, happiness or joy, sadness, anger, disgust, fear, these are basic human emotions. They're built into our biology, and we're meant to feel them, and they all serve a purpose. They all serve a purpose for our survival and our adaptation, and they're normal. And, the extent to which we feel these emotions, how strong they are, how big or small they are, they're fleeting. They change over time. They change based on our situations and our experiences. And there's also variations between people in how intensely they feel emotions or how they express their emotions. This also varies across cultures. Our culture, for example, there's still a stigma around talking about our emotions and expressing them. And I wanted to end by sharing my favorite poem by the poet Rumi from the 13th century. So this poem is very old, and I feel that it speaks to me today, just like it had been written today in our time. And it's called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes because each has been set as a guide from beyond. I also want to mention that Fernbrook Family Center is offering free 1-hour consultations. So if that is something that you or somebody that you know might find helpful, might benefit from, please go ahead and give us a call. I have the number right here for you. And go ahead and give a shout out that you heard about this from the City of Casson and the Mental Health Initiative. And of course, if you need immediate mental health support, dial 911. You can call the Crisis Response of Southeast Minnesota, and you can text to the hotline if you are more comfortable doing that. Here are some other helpful websites. I've mentioned makeitokay.org. The NAMI website, it also has fantastic resources. So does the National Institutes of Mental Health. Lots of great fact sheets and lots of just good information about understanding the signs and symptoms of mental health disorders. And I want to say that for our next discussion together, we're going to be talking about some of those warning signs and then what's that next step? What can we do if we or somebody that we know or love are dealing with mental health struggles? What can we do to take care of that? We'll talk about that next time. As far as child mental health, I highly recommend the Child Mind Institute or childmind.org. You can also sign up to get email tips. They have a daily Facebook Live where they tackle various topics, especially those specific to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's wonderful, and they have lots of guides on their website. I also recommend a few books if you like to read or if you want to do it on Audible and listen to audiobooks. This is written by a therapist, Lori Gottlieb. Maybe you should talk to somebody or someone, excuse me. The Body Keeps the Score is another great one, teaching us some more about trauma and how that has an effect on our body. The Deepest Well is written by the first Surgeon General of California, who I mentioned before, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. There's also Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers that also tells us more about what is happening in our body when we're dealing with the stress response. And, what can we do about it? Why does stress lead to disease? These sorts of things that we touched on tonight. Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. She also has wonderful TED Talks. Permission to Feel is also fantastic. The Whole Brain Child. If you are a caregiver in any capacity, this will teach you a lot about the child's brain and how you can support their brain functioning and their social emotional development. I also recommend Mindsight. And some recommended listening if you prefer podcasts. So from American Public Media, there's The Hilarious World of Depression, Terrible, Thanks for Asking, Therapy for Black Girls, the brain architects from the Center of the Developing Child at Harvard. And NAMI has a couple as well. One more generally mental health, and another one specifically focused for communities of color. And that is all the time that we have tonight. So thank you so much for joining. I hope to see you again in a couple of weeks, where again we will just talk about some more signs and symptoms, those warning signs to look for, and how to find help and what we can do about that to take care of ourselves. I hope that everybody stays well and healthy and happy. Wear your masks, take care of yourself, wash your hands, stay healthy, and thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.